Welcome back to Sustainability Matters. I'm Tria Case. Today, we're taking a closer look at the impact of artificial intelligence, or AI, on our lives and the planet. It can help anticipate climate risks, manage energy and water systems, and even predict disastrous events like wildfires and droughts. It's revolutionizing how we work, learn, and make decisions. But the question is, at what cost? To unpack the promise and the perils of AI, we'll kick things off with a word from Andrew Falzone.
Whether it's ChatGPT or Claude, facial recognition systems, or self-driving car technology, artificial intelligence, or AI, is suddenly everywhere. From writing emails to generating images and answering complex questions. But what exactly is AI? AI systems are programs that perform tasks we normally associate with human intelligence, things like recognition, prediction, decision-making, and generation or creation. AI itself isn't new, it's existed for decades, but many experts say the current AI boom accelerated in the early 2020s with the rise of powerful generative systems. But to understand how modern AI works, it helps to start with something simpler: algorithms. An algorithm is a simple step-by-step set of instructions a computer follows to solve a problem. Take spam filters, for example. A traditional algorithm might follow a rule like this. If an email subject contains certain phrases like free money, mark it as spam. That works, but it's limited. Humans have to write every single rule, and spammers quickly learn how to get around them. Modern AI takes a different approach called machine learning. Instead of programming every rule, engineers train systems using massive datasets, sometimes millions of examples. For a spam filter, that might mean feeding the system millions of emails labeled spam or not spam. Over time, the AI begins to recognize patterns on its own, learning what spam looks like without being explicitly programmed for every scenario. But artificial intelligence doesn't just rely on clever algorithms, it relies on massive physical infrastructure. And much of that work happens in places people never see. Data centers. A data center is a specialized facility filled with thousands of servers working around the clock. These servers include high-performance processors designed for accelerated computing, especially GPU chips that power modern machine learning. These machines generate enormous amounts of heat, which is why AI data centers rely on sophisticated cooling systems, including liquid cooling, advanced ventilation, and industrial-scale heat exchangers. They also demand huge amounts of electricity, sometimes drawing as much power as a small town. So while AI may feel abstract or even invisible, it rests on a very physical foundation. Artificial intelligence is already being used in everything from medical research to climate modeling and energy systems. AI could help solve major global challenges, but it also raises concerns about misinformation, surveillance technologies, worker replacement, and the need for thoughtful oversight and regulation. AI also raises concerns about the behemoth of resources it uses, like water and energy. Since AI isn't going anywhere anytime soon, the key to harnessing its power in a way that's more constructive than destructive may lie in how it utilizes resources and upholds the humanity it's trying to support in the first place. I'm Andrew Falzone for Sustainability Matters on CUNY TV.
Today I'm joined by a CUNY student and scientist who recently released a groundbreaking report on AI that has potential to change how we measure and manage AI's impact on our local communities and the planet. PhD candidate Hussain Bokhari. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So there's a lot of mixed information out there about AI and sustainability. So we thought today we would start with a little quiz. Since you're a student, I'm sure you'll be used to this. It's not multiple choice. It's actually going to be true, false.
Okay.
So you can tell me if it's true or false. Okay, ready?
All right.
Okay. One AI search on ChatGPT uses the equivalent of a 16-ounce bottle of water.
I have to go maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll talk more about that in a little bit. There is nothing everyday AI users can do to use AI more responsibly. That's false. Okay. AI can accelerate climate change and help solve it at the same time. True. Okay, so I think hopefully that helps people think about some of these questions that many of us are asking, and really a lot of us when we're thinking about AI, we're thinking about ChatGPT or just an AI assistant, but you're thinking about it also in the context of research.
Yeah.
You're a CUNY student getting your PhD now, and obviously something happened along the way through your CUNY education that sent you down this path to work in this incredibly interesting and cutting-edge field. What got you into AI? What got you into this as your research analysis in your PhD study?
So I was initially studying physics in college, and just like my generation, I got more interested in climate change and its impacts on virtually every sector and the economy. And so I found Dr. Charles Voris-Marty at the Advanced Science Research Center, and I got very interested in using some of the physics principles that I learned to develop models to understand not just climate change, but the impacts that humans have on all natural resources. So it sort of became a very intuitive connection between physics and climate change and water and general anthropogenic impacts. My PhD research is really focused on water resources and how that's connected to our power generation. So in real time, we started to see data centers kind of take over and become an emerging industry. And once we started to understand that there's a complete lack of regulation and understanding of how much water and power is being consumed, it was just a ripe area for modeling and kind of targeting, those scenario-based approaches. So it kind of just magically fit into exactly what we were studying. So I'm sort of at the right place at the right time.
Nice, and it's great that CUNY was able to have the faculty expertise across what you needed in order to make that happen.
We're starting to put together a pretty large study to try to understand, one, the water consumption in data centers, and two, how the power consumption in data centers also intensifies the overall water consumption. So we try to understand, using these geospatial models, first where these data centers are located, the levels of water stress in the areas that they're located, and then also from the resulting power use of these data centers, how there's a compound water intensity created in some of these communities.
Can I stop you for 1 second? So we were talking about water.
Yeah.
Why is water important when we're talking about these data centers?
Yeah. So there are three ways in which let's say a chatbot prompt will generate some kind of consumption of water. So first you have the water that's involved in manufacturing the GPUs and the servers, the chips, and that's just like a very raw manufacturing industrial kind of number. And then you have all the water that's consumed by the data center, the server itself, and this is our direct on-site water use. And so just like our laptop heats up and you have fans running to cool down the laptop itself, you have a building hosting thousands to millions of these GPUs, and cooling them down requires a lot of water. And then the third part is you have these power-hungry GPUs, and you need a lot of water to cool down those power plants as well to produce that electricity. So you have those three sources of water that are all contributing to, what you're typing in your laptop, what prompt, what's the weather tomorrow, for example, and you're getting a response out. So it's a very complex, arrangement of factors contributing to that. The problem is there's a lot of competition for specifically fresh water. So we have a pretty solid idea on, the domestic sector, for example, the water to feed New York City that comes from, upstream reservoirs. And we have a pretty solid idea of how much water it takes to irrigate a crop or to produce or manufacture a product in an industrial plant, or even to generate a certain kilowatt hour of energy in a power plant. Mm-hmm. But in order to really get an accurate number on exactly how much water it takes to generate a ChatGPT prompt, for example, there's just way too many roadblocks. And you have an increasing strain from multiple sectors trying to compete for the same water resources. So when we talk about terms like water stress, what we're really talking about is the compound pressure from all these different sectors on the same water sources. Even though we have a lot of salt water available and a lot of fresh water trapped in the ice of the ground, the water that's available to us to consume is very, very limited. So we care ultimately about how certain infrastructure are interacting with that water, whether they're polluting it or whether they're consuming it, meaning not returning it back to the original source. And it's important to study because this has implications for every aspect of the economy, has impacts on every community that we, in the US and in the world as well.
So it's important that we measure AI's impact on our natural resources, but also measure it in the context of all the other things that we need. What are the kinds of inputs that you're utilizing to get to that? How do you get that data?
So it is a very spatial game where we need to sort of figure out, where the rivers are, where the municipalities are, where the existing infrastructure is for where the water is coming from based off of where the data centers are located, and then where the energy is coming from based off of where the balancing authorities are for those data centers. We assume that we have a solid idea of the power plant side of things because we know exactly where the power plants are and how much water they consume and all the thermal pollution impacts downstream of those power plants. The part that we're sort of unknown to us, that's very mysterious, is the data center side.
Do each of the companies publish the types of technologies that they're using, or
no? Yeah, it's very rare to see, exactly the information we need.
Okay.
I think, the overwhelming majority of data centers are, sort of protected by these NDAs and a lack of regulation.
Okay.
So we essentially need to scrape together different public databases and go through the individual permits of the data centers. Then, there's not a lot of accurate information out there. We create scenarios for the data centers based off of their age, based off of their size, to sort of estimate how much power they require and also which kinds of technologies they might utilize. So through that scenario-based approach, we're essentially trying to map out risk levels for these data centers. And
how do you determine size just by square footage of the location?
Yeah, so we're trying to piece together, certain server equipment used, so the number of racks or the the kinds of processing chips that are being utilized. We're also trying to figure out whether there are cooling towers in these data centers which indicate that they're using water and consuming it, evaporating it for cooling.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you learned from that study? In your analysis, did you find any trends in where data centers are being located? Yeah,
we're finding that it's really troubling. It's an alarming amount of data centers concentrated in water scarce areas. And there are a few reasons for that. You're going to find the cheapest land and you're going to find the best climate for evaporation in the driest places in the US, which are in the Southwest in California and Texas, Arizona, Colorado. So it just so happens that the areas with a big drought and little water problem are very ideal to sort of efficiently evaporate water and also cheaply and quickly build these data centers out. So it's almost like a perfect problem where if we don't have intervention or regulation of these systems, then there's nothing stopping that purely economic incentive.
What about energy? What is the impact of AI on like a community's energy use?
Yeah, I think just like the water aspect, it really matters, what community or what county we're talking about. So if you have an already strained electricity grid, just like if you have an already water scarce area, the impact of that data center, especially if it's a large hyperscale data center to support like large AI uses, that impact is going to be very large, where you can actually feel the impact in your electricity bill. Or, we have stories of, water taps running dry, like literally. I think, the first, it matters where they're located and where the power source is. And then the second is how the energy is being produced. Are they being produced by vintage, coal power plants? Are they being, fed by nuclear power plants or hydropower dams or, solar farms and wind farms? So tracking down exactly where that power is coming from is going to be crucial.
It seems like what you're saying is that it almost depends on where the data center is as to what to really understand the impact. Should there be particular criteria then that could help us locate data centers in smarter places?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a need for regulation on not just getting a permit for your data center, but really taking into account all these different environmental and climate factors. So having some kind of siting criteria in the regulation to sort of guide where it's best or optimal to have those data centers constructed is absolutely crucial. But also, it obviously matters what kinds of cooling technologies are being used in the data centers. So having some kind of regulation to guide the technology use is going to be really important. And I think having in the regulation a specific target for your water use is also going to be really important. And I think also having the input of the community is going to be really important. If you bypass the community itself, and we see a lot of successes now in New Jersey and other places, as soon as the community speaks up, as soon as people understand that this is not as simple as just generating jobs, this is actually going to impact the resources in that community, I think the community does rise and does have an important voice there. So taking into account what the community feels about that center is going to be really important.
So you mentioned renewables as one of the ways to lessen the impact on the energy use. I'm a proponent of solar and battery storage. Are you seeing those technologies being used more as folks are considering sites?
Not enough. I'm seeing certain cases of, for example, Google's newer centers being built, with a dedicated solar farm, which is the ideal because at least you're taking that huge footprint off of the electricity grid and the large associated water consumption from that power use. So you have a dispatchable generation source that you could turn on and off at your own will and sort of meet your own demand. But, from the time that we started studying this to now, we're seeing emerging technologies like closed loop systems where, you can reduce evaporation by using a liquid coolant to sort of circulate around the plant. We're seeing a lot of change as we study this. And, from the time this airs, I think there will be a few more reports published on exactly what those impacts are. So the main thing is we're trying to keep track of the changes and we're trying to keep up with the emerging data center industry. We want to sort of accept the uncertainties and instead figure out, where sustainability matters more through these scenarios.
Will we get to a time where we know where our query is being sent? Could you imagine a time where you understand that you're using GPUs from a green data center versus a non-green data center, if you will?
I always imagine that it's sort of like when you're looking up a flight and you see an estimate of the tons of carbon dioxide. I think it's going to require a lot more transparency from the data center industry to get to that place.
So as a scientist, how has AI changed the way that we look at the planet? Are there things that we might have missed before that we're really able to capture now because we have AI versus sort of a person sitting down and trying to model something?
I think definitely. Because the way that the machine learning works is you're not just simulating things from the ground up from the physics-based and infrastructure, factors. You're trying to train an incredibly smart chatbot or program to sort of learn the ins and outs of a particular system So all these complex linkages that are usually difficult to try to simulate from the ground up, you can just give a ton of data to one of these super smart, intelligent bots and try to see what patterns it picks up on. So if you go to, bots in chess, for example, just certain things that a chatbot can do that a human cannot do, and certain patterns that they can see that we can't see.
Well, we have, over 50% of venture capital money is now going into AI-related technologies, companies, right? So do you think that this excitement and investment in AI is somehow overshadowing the impacts of AI?
Yeah, certainly. I think, there's a lot of excitement, and there is no doubt that we are experiencing an AI revolution in all these sectors, and that's why there's so much money being poured in. But I think it's very bad news if you bypass all of the resource impacts, because there is an inherent limit that the environment is placing on these centers, and a lot of people just don't understand that. If you're only afraid of the economic impacts of AI, you're gravely mistaken, because the rivers are only so big. There's only so much rainfall. There's only so much groundwater to access, and there is a ceiling that we're going to hit very soon if we don't start to take into account just on the water aspect alone. But then you also have our aging infrastructure, our electricity grids, that are also an inherent ceiling to the growth of AI. So if you don't take these resources into account, you can't possibly build out the kinds of systems that you want. I think more collaboration between scientists and the stakeholders in the data center space is absolutely essential. More regulation of the data centers is going to inform us a lot more on, exactly how much these different technologies are consuming. And I hope that we get to the place that we could, identify exactly how much your prompt will generate. Maybe you can actually see in real time how much you're sort of consuming. So maybe you're inherently going to
be more efficient,
conserve more. Yeah. If you actually see that impact. But as of now, I'm not sure. At the federal level, at least, we're not seeing any regulation on this. I think it's really going to be done at the local community and state scale.
Which is where the impact is being felt, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it certainly makes sense that localities would want to find ways to either create more efficient data centers or help us be more efficient in our use of them. So a lot of people want to figure out how to be more efficient in their use of AI. Are there some things that you can recommend to the person who might be feeling a little overwhelmed by even thinking they might have an impact on the use of AI?
Yeah, I think we're all dealing with this in real time. In my PhD studies, I've seen the AI chatbots sort of take over in a lot of writing tasks and analysis tasks. I try to first take away some of the involuntary uses of AI. So, AI sort of essentially invaded our emails and our smartphones and our Google prompts. Just needlessly. So I would say the first easiest thing to do is, wherever you see AI being sort of integrated, you should try to be a little bit more aware of that. And then the harder aspect of the question is, sort of trying to reduce our dependence on AI for minor tasks.
Just use your brain where you can.
Yeah, use your brain a little bit more, and maybe you don't need AI, 30 times in the same day.
Yeah. Are you using AI in your research?
So I don't directly use AI in my research. I don't use AI for writing. I don't use it for analyses. I'll use it for certain tasks that are incredibly helpful, that are incredibly time-consuming for me as well. So organizing large drafts of a paper, for example, or finding sources on a particular topic. So I'm starting to get a very good idea of what AI, at least now, is good at, and what it can help me with, and then what is just purely wasteful.
This is a really important study, and thank you for the work that you're doing and putting it together. I think it's important for people to understand, and hopefully it'll help us develop the criteria we need in order to place these data centers in the right places, but also help us all understand how to better utilize AI in the smartest, wisest ways. So thank you so much for coming in today and for talking with us and for all the work that you're doing.
No, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Now, Kyra Baytal is going to share simple ways you can make your own data footprint cleaner and greener.
Today, I'm challenging myself to reduce my digital footprint. I'm turning off the auto AI features in my browser. AI can be super useful, but do I really need it running every time I look something up? And you can actually download an AI tool, so you're not pulling from the cloud. It did take water to train these models, but if I run it locally on my computer, it's not constantly needing more to cool down servers at the data center. I want to watch this show, and if I download it over Wi-Fi now, I won't be using a ton of energy later to stream it at high peak hours. To all my eco-friendly peeps, what are your hacks for cutting down your digital footprint? Add to the comments and subscribe to Sustainability Matters for more ways to be a climate hero. Thanks for joining me. I'm Kyra, and this is Green to Go.
Be sure to join us next month as we explore the impact of climate change on our mental health and meet some unique individuals helping us to navigate these uncertain times with creativity and hope. Please keep the conversation going. We want to hear from you. Follow and message us on social media. Download our CUNY TV app.